starting to arrive. Thank you very much indeed. Good to see you, Bob, Christine, Simon, Nicholas. Thank you very much for joining us today. My great pleasure today to introduce you to Gordon Kerr. You're a strategic consultant for everything legal, but has extended his expertise today to VAT. And thank you so much, Alan Davis from Henderson Noggy, for joining us today for what is actually a member-driven session. There's been a lot of questions. Gordon's going to flesh that out in just a second. Just a couple of normal rules. First of all, if you would like to have a chat or ask a question, there are two ways that you can do this. The first is to open the chat box. You'll see at the bottom of your screen the little chat icon. Just hit that and it will open up the chat box. You can also use the Q&A, which is just a little further to the right. If you're using a Mac, I don't know what it looks like on a PC, I do apologize. And you can put questions in there as well. This is obviously intended to be an interactive session because this is something that involves a lot of confusion and a lot of issues for every member of the ARP. So don't hesitate to put questions in. Just one little notice about putting questions in the chat box with Zoom. Zoom's default is to send the questions only to the host and the panelists. If you would like your question to be more broadly seen by the rest of the attendees, then please click on the little arrow on the right and scroll down to everyone. And that will mean everyone will be able to see your question and also comment on it and maybe give some answers or certainly some valuable experiences that they may have had. We're only 2 minutes past the hour. We've got 85 people signed up today. As you all know, it's being recorded, so it will be available on demand as soon as I get the edit done, and I will try and get that out to everybody tomorrow. So if you need to take a call, don't worry, you can go back over it and make sure that you haven't missed any really important information. So Gordon, I will hand to you. Thank you again for doing this. Great to see you both. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Dom. And yes, as Dom touched on there, the need for a briefing on VAT really arose because a number of members had questions about how VAT was affected by Brexit. That was very much the starting point. And as we discussed that, it became clear that there were a number of other issues or different practices that relocation firms in different countries were following. And so it became clear that it'd be really useful to have this session. Now, by way of introduction to Alan Davis, Alan was the VAT specialist that trained and guided my old company's Morton Fraser relocation and team relocations in the past. So it's great to have Alan on board with us here, able to answer our questions and give us some guidance on how VAT should work for relocation services. So the great thing is Alan is familiar with some of the odd ways of the world and the kind of things that we do in the relocation industry. So Alan, welcome. Just to get us started, I wonder if you could touch on your own background, what you do and what your firm does.
Sure. Okay. So good afternoon. Pleasure to be here. Actually, it's nice to be speaking across the water, and hopefully Europe doesn't think that we've been completely cut off. We still speak to you, and we still do trade with you. In terms of my history, I've been a VAT specialist all my life. I joined what's now Revenue and Customs as an 18-year-old all those years ago. I shouldn't have told you my age. I should have allowed you to work that out. But 38 years later, I'm still doing VAT. And in that time, the UK has obviously left the EU, and things have changed in that regard. In terms of Henderson Noggy, as well as being the VAT partner in Henderson Noggy, it's a firm of chartered accountants with 4 offices across Scotland. And we'll provide pretty much any service that you'd expect from a firm of chartered accountants. But as I say, my speciality is VAT. And post-Brexit, we've done lots of cross-border stuff to pick up on issues as they develop. And probably kind of just as I launched into that, then one of the big things is that the people had that fear about what was going to change. Certainly, around that January turnover period. And the biggest change was relating to the movement of goods. And that's really not what I'm speaking about today. So actually, it's quite straightforward because nothing substantively changed. The rules on cross-border supplies of services have remained the same pre and post-Brexit. So we'll pick up on that. And the plan today is really just to kind of give you that sketch of how that works in theory, and then we'll open up to a number of questions. Hopefully, you'll have found something interesting and ask supplementary questions, and we can expand on that going forward. I did say nothing changed. There is one little change that I'd forgotten about in terms of just pure admin. So one of the things that we all had to do when we were in the EU was provide statistics. So when we made an EC sale from the UK to Europe or vice versa, we provided an EC sales list, or a kind of handshake across the water of I've sold some services to this VAT registration and vice versa. That ceased from the 1st of January 21. So that exchange of information is no longer required. So one of the things that lots of suppliers in Europe will have done, and vice versa as well, UK out, is capture the other party's VAT number, local VAT number. That's no longer required when the UK entities involved. It's just within Europe that you'll be doing that. So that's the fundamental change in terms of services. Are you able to share slides now, Dominic?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to let everybody know, we're just going to do a screen share, and I don't know if that happens on all computers, but sometimes the screen share will make the Zoom take up your entire screen. If you want it back into the smaller window, just press escape.
Great stuff. So there's the plan. If that's not what you're expecting to hear, you're on the wrong call. And we're going to cover VAT and cross-border relocation services. If you'd like to move that one on. And I'll start with the essential rules. It's called Place of Supply of Services Rules. And again, just to be clear, what I'm going to cover today is around business-to-business supplies. I'm not talking about if you're supplying direct to consumers. That there are different rules for that, and I can cover that in questions, or we can do it another time, or you can just ask me a direct question offline. But the plan today is just to cover business to business. And as I say just now, the main changes are not around services, they're around goods. And for the purposes of this session, I won't cover goods per se, I'll just cover the movement of services. And whenever I get asked a question, and Gordon may testify to this, that whenever I'm asked a question, I tend to ask questions back, because it's really, really important to understand a number of things before you can get clear on the VAT position. And the questions are there. I'll run through each of them. It's really important to understand where your customer is established and when the supplier is established. And we were talking just before we came on about that scenario where perhaps you've got an office in one country, but a branch in another country. And it's important to understand who's actually providing the service. Is it the local branch, or is it done from head office? And all the work is delivered from there, so you can be clear on what's going on. Tends to be that if you've got what they call the human resource, human and intellectual resource to deliver from another country, that's likely to be where the supplier is established. So it's a matter of fact. If you don't have staff in the country, it's less likely to be supplying from there. But if you do, and you've got an office and you've got all the kind of resources to deliver from there, you may well be established from there. But either way, when you're deciding whether to charge VAT or not, you need to be clear on where you're supplying it from. And that's the point about the branches there. But the other big thing to be really aware of is the nature of the supply you're making. So inevitably that boils down to what have you signed up for, and what do your terms and conditions or your engagement letter say that you're going to be doing. And we'll come on to that in a bit more detail shortly. But those are fundamental building blocks as to getting the right result in the end that you're looking for, that you get clarity on each of those aspects, so that you can then give yourself a clear indication of what the VAT position will be. So having established those details, Dominic, if you could move that one on. The answer is quite straightforward. He said that the place of supply is where the customer belongs, business to business supply of services. So as long as you've got confirmation of where the customer belongs, and again, that really relies on you making sure that you understand where that customer is. Again, they may have entities in various locations that you want to be clear on, but if you're clear on the answer, then your answer will be straightforward. You can go straight to the place where the customer is established as your place of supply. And if they're not in the same country as you, you're unlikely to be charging local VAT on their supply. We'll come on to how that's actually accounted for at the other end in a few slides too. Can you move that along, Dominic? So, like everything in VAT, there's a great principle, and then there are exceptions. So the principle is that the supply is where the customer belongs, but there are exceptions. And the biggest one that's of importance to the relocation sector is that there is an exception for what's called land-related services. And the rule there is that those supplies are supplied where the land is located. And again, we'll come on to a bit of detail what that actually means, but that's changing the basic general rule position from where the customer is to where the land is. And there are also carve-outs for quite a lot of other things that I haven't included in the slides, but things like transport. Again, we were talking just before we came on about physical performance, admission to conferences, and I know you have conferences regularly. And typically you'll be paying local VAT because there's a requirement that the services related to the physical performance, the admission to a conference, is supplied in the country where the conference is, and that effectively overrides the general rules of business to business. And the other one is restaurants and catering. So that's why when you are abroad, you'll pay local tax rather than saying that you're a foreigner and you shouldn't be paying VAT. There's a specific carve out or exception to the general rule, business to business. Okay, Dominic, if we can move that one along and build that up. So I talked about land-related services, and I thought I would include a few examples that were pertinent in the relocation sector. And I think, what I will do is I'll read through these rather than not, just to make sure that we cover each of them. Surveying and assessing property. So that's a physical action that somebody's doing locally. Valuing property. Gordon's involved very much in the legal services side, conveyancing, drawing up contracts and leases, and title searches in relation to specific properties. So again, that's a distinction that needs to be made, and be clear on what the supply is. Remember, I said there was 3 things to do, the last of which was to be clear on what your supply is. So, what are you doing? Are you just looking at a nice place to live in terms of an area or schools or something like that, or are you actually looking at the details of a particular property that somebody wants to move into or lease or whatever? Any transactions around the sale or lease of a land and property will be land related. Accommodation is regarded as land related. Again, if you're putting people up into hotels locally while they relocate, they'll be charged naturally enough local VAT. Effectively work on any buildings. So if you're repairing or maintaining buildings, that will always be subject to local VAT. As will the kind of management charges that go alongside that. And architectural services will typically be where there's a specific building to be built, and they'll be looking at the land related. Sorry, I'm just being distracted by a couple of questions arriving there. So given that the questions are coming at this moment, I'm just going to quickly click onto those and read them. So if there is something that I can answer as I go along, I'll try and do that just now. So if you just bear with me. So
what I'll do is I'll just stop the share for a minute so that everyone can go back and have a look at the chat, and then just let me know when you'd like to go back in.
Okay, thank you. examples to put in context. So I'll come back to that.
Also, just as a quick one, will you be happy to share those slides with the delegates after?
Yes, I meant to say that at the start, though. I think you would be sharing that as naturally as part of your delivery. So, I mean, just picking up on a couple of questions there then. So the home search, and again, let's be clear on what home search is. But if home search is not related to a specific building at that point, then it's not land related, and it's therefore a general supply, supplied where the customer belongs supply, which is quite straightforward. The difficulty will come, and we'll come on to another slide shortly, where home search is more than just searching for a home. It goes on to actually delivering the home into the hands of the tenant or owner. Negotiating a tenancy agreement, I think that was covered in the slide actually, and I'll just remind myself.
Yeah, I was going to say, if that was the only service, and occasionally I would be asked to review a tenancy agreement, let's say for an American company, then that would be a land-related transaction, or correct me if I'm wrong, Alan.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah.
But I would be charging VAT to that American client because it's land-related, whereas if I was doing home search for them, for example, just pure home search, then it wouldn't fall under the land-related exemption. So picking up with Simon Scott's previous question.
Yeah, I think that's covered in the slide as well. Legal services such as conveyancing is land-related, where it's a specific property. So I think we're clear on that. Delivering a home, that may be a loose word I've used as I've chatted through there. I mean, I think the line I would always take is that if you don't know specifically, or you're not working on a specific property at that time, and that's not land related. As soon as you identify the property and say, right, what do we do to get that person in the house or the dwelling or whatever, and start doing legals and property related activities, then you'll be into land related services. And then, as I say, what we'll do is identify whether that's enough to make it a mixed supply, or whether there's still an overriding home search supply that can be dealt with under the general rule. Just serviced accommodation is not covered because we do not have a specific property. I'm not sure I understand that.
Service accommodation not covered because of it. So service accommodation would be where it's a temporary accommodation, a serviced accommodation company that provides a range of properties for short-term use, almost akin to a hotel, an alternative to a hotel until permanent accommodation is found.
So, I mean, I suppose the VAT aspect of that would be a charge for organising that, presumably, and the tenant would pay the rent effectively, or does the organiser pay the rent?
Because it's short term, normally the employer would be paying the rent for that, because it would just be, let's say, 2 weeks, 4 weeks until
something else is fixed.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I think I probably need to think about that more broadly. It sounds more land related than not, so I need to understand exactly what was being provided, whether it was just arranging for people to go into that, and that's part of the home search still, because there's no home found at that point, effectively. So yeah, I think I'd want to get to the nitty gritty of the agreement on that one.
These questions are getting longer and longer.
Indeed, yeah, indeed.
Complicated topic. I think actually Sue and Simon are aiming at the same thing. So Simon's saying, so does that mean we would need to value the lease negotiation element of the home search and apply VAT to that? And Sue is kind of saying, so for a range of services, service accommodation, orientation to a home search, managing the tenancy application, checking the tenancy agreement, checking services and settling in services, we would have to charge VAT on the tenancy agreement element.
And the short answer is probably. And what I'll do is, rather than try and answer it right now, let me finish the remainder of the slides, because it does focus on that point. and then perhaps we'll come back and answer that in the context that we've then gone through. How about that for a plan? Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah.
So can we go back to the slides then? And so we're going to land related. So just to kind of wrap that up, the whole point is that, again, identify exactly what you're doing. And if there's anything in relation to a specific property, there's every likelihood that that's going to be carved out by the land-related exception from the general rule. So if we look at the next slide then, this is an area that's not exclusive to the cross-border relocation services. It's a real issue within VAT and has been for certainly as long as I've ever advised on VAT, distinguishing between what's called single and multiple supplies, and whether or not some can be disregarded. And I suppose that to a certain extent, because it's difficult, it has been litigated over the years. Usually, and again, we're kind of touching on Brexit as such. Historically, the UK would have been bound by the European Court of Justice, and post-Brexit we're not, but the thought is that we'll stick to their rules for now, or their decisions, and see how that goes, sort of thing. So in the UK, we would probably follow the ECJ decisions that have applied to all the other EU countries. So in general principle terms, we should all be working on the same case law that's been built up over the years. And the easiest way to think about this is that if you're providing one named service, a relocation service or a home search service, what you need to almost think about it from the point of view of what the person who's buying it thinks they're getting for their money. And if they're generally getting something fairly indiscriminate in terms of built properties, in other words, a service that helps them into the country and finds nice areas and stuff like that, that's likely to be a non-land related service and a single supply of services. But if there's a kind of menu of services that they're provided within that general engagement or service line, then there could be things within that are distinct enough to require the land related carve out to apply. So again, I talked earlier about being clear on what the supply is. Look at your engagement terms, your terms of business, to ensure that there is clarity in terms of what you're talking about, what's being supplied, what do people get for their money, and that may be different across each territory. You might have different terms and conditions, so be clear on what that's what's being done. Here's my example then. If it's simply what I would call a general relocation service, it's likely to be a single supply, and that will be supplied where the customer belongs. However, if you separate and show different things, that's an indicator that there could be multiple supplies. So you might have a general search and then something specific in terms of the house that people have seen and would like to move into. And it's possible to then break that down using a fair and reasonable value allocation. And then there might be other things that you regard as what are called incidental or ancillary. And the phrase that's used in case law is that these supplies are only consumed or delivered to better enjoy the main supply. So in very simple terms, if I went to a football match for a corporate ticket, and as part of that I got my lunch and a program included, the charge for the meal and the program are effectively incidental to the entertainment of a football match. And I can't then break it down and say, well, actually the program would have been zero rated in the UK and therefore I don't have VAT to incur. So it's that kind of concept that you have to think about. Are these services being delivered because they help me with my main supply, or do they create a benefit to me that's essentially separate from the original? And certainly in my head, the provision of a home search is one thing, but actually then creating a legal arrangement where I can lease or buy a house is different. It's a fundamental different service. It's not supplementary to finding it. It's actually doing something specific that allows a legal process to proceed.
So, Alan, if I could just clarify that, we're saying that, let's say there's 3 days of home search, a property is found, and the relocation company is then, the DSP is asked to review the lease agreement. We're saying that that review of the lease agreement, along with anything else that happens once that particular property is found, should be separated out. That would be the example. I mean, I think when we were looking at this earlier as ARP, the UK Association of Relocation Professionals, I think we were given an example from one of the members, which showed something like 4 hours had been spent on combination of reviewing the lease, the tenancy agreement, and also I think there was a check-in process for that particular property, arranging utilities. There was a list of things, and they said they reckon 4 to 5 hours had been spent on that overall part of the service. And that was an example where you felt that would justify it being shown, that collectively was land related rather than incidental to the 3-day home search. Is that?
Yeah, that's a good example. And just looking at one of the questions that came in there as well, could you just bundle your services and call it a general relocation services so that you don't have to then break it down? You could. Certainly, I mean, I should start by saying I'm talking about how HMRC in the UK would deal with this. So there may be shades within the other EU countries, but normally a taxing authority will look for as much tax as they can. Certainly, that's my experience. So it may feel like an easy thing to do is just describe it in such a single way that there can only be one VAT liability. But HMRC do have the ability to look beyond the description and say, well, actually, what is being supplied here? Is the engagement any different from that? Is there any substance behind the activities that are being provided that is not a general supplies of services that might be then caught by the land-related carve-out? And it's very much like, you can call it whatever you like, but if it's an elephant and you call it a mouse, it's still an elephant. So it's always sensible to try and describe things correctly rather than stretching things.
Would the tax authorities in whatever country, but obviously, we're most familiar here with HMRC, does that mean that they could actually ask to see your contract or your terms of engagement and look beyond a single description such as home search and see that in the engagement letter it was split into different components, albeit not separate prices for each component, but it was clear that here is the list of things that had to be done. And if some of these, or a significant number of these, are land related, then there could be a challenge made by the revenue.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Certainly, again, speaking from the UK's point of view, there's two things. One, there is a requirement to fully describe the supply on your sales invoice, which gives them the ability to say, well, that's not good enough. But they're also able to see documents related to the making of taxable supplies. So documents relating to that would normally be a contract or an engagement letter or something like that. So there's every chance that they would, if they noted it and queried it, they could ask more questions and seek more information to get clarity. Right, so yeah, I see Simon's just said that. So the HMRC have regarded the lease negotiation as ancillary to the main supply. So that's entirely possible and fact-based. That if the lease negotiation is regarded as such a small part of it, that it can be subsumed into the main supply, and that might be the pragmatic way forward in terms of essentially treating or ensuring your supplies of relocation are supplied where the customer belongs. That you get comfortable that the land-related part is so small as to be an ancillary or incidental.
Yeah, so having some reasonable basis that you can argue. Because I mean, I guess there'll be many DSPs who will have for several years taken a view that, well, it's just one bundle of services that we're delivering, and they'd be loath to change unless they really had to. And I guess that's going to be the dilemma, that what we're describing as the technically correct position is difficult in practice if, for example, your competitors are not taking the same view. Just to be purely commercial about it.
And the, further difficulty is really that effectively you might have two VAT inspectors who take a slightly different view. Some might say, well, I agree that these are outside the scope because they're supplied to a German customer and ask no further questions. The other one might say, that seems strange. Let me have a look at the engagement terms. Let me have a proper look, and kind of dig a bit further. So that's a variable that you just can't control, unfortunately. It's we can say what the right position should be, but there's always a chance that one inspector will take a slightly different view than another.
Yeah, but the thing that is absolutely clear, I think we're saying, is that if the service is based around, for example, reviewing a tenancy agreement quite detached from, if a separate instruction comes in and asks your firm to review that tenancy agreement, or for that matter, and carry out an inspection of that specific property, then that's unquestionable. That would be land related. Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah. Just working backwards there, I see the one there, the ruling that Simon mentioned. Is it related to Clearview, which I presume is his employer, or a general ruling? Generally speaking, in the UK and elsewhere, as I understand it, taxpayers may get rulings directly to them from the taxing authority. Certainly in the UK, that taxing authority, HMRC, will restrict that ruling to that taxpayer. So they would certainly try and resist any attempts from other parties to say, well, if they've got that, we can have that. Then, if you can find something that helps you in their published guidance, then that's one thing. But direct rulings for taxpayers will apply only to those specific taxpayers. Yeah, I mean, just looking at the last question there about talking about the industry standard, you would think so, that HMRC would see an industry standard. In practice, they're not that joined up or thoughtful enough or commercial enough, and that might be the better way to describe it. Whilst it's a huge organisation, they don't have the manpower and quality of staff to look at sectors per se and say, well, how's it done elsewhere? Certainly, I mean, it sounds like an old man talking now, but when I was a lad, in HMRC had central offices that gave rulings centrally, but we also gave local rulings, and local rulings could be less than thoughtful in terms of, or reliable in terms of, it could be a random answer from a guy who answered it on a Friday afternoon without too much thought, and the quality of rulings can sometimes be quite sketchy. So unless the ruling says, yes, we've been to the head office policy team and this is their ruling, you might want to treat that ruling as something that's specific to you, and you might cherish it as well in terms of you've had that comfort. That said, if there's an area where you're a little bit concerned, or if the sector want to go to HMRC and get a departmental ruling, that's possible as well, so that everybody can work under the same rules. But of course, the difficulty is that if you go to them and say, we think it's outside the scope because it's all most of it isn't land related, they may actually take the point and say, well, actually, we disagree, and you end up having a significant disagreement, which I see now actually as I read it.
Just ask you a favour, for the benefit of anybody who's watching this on the recording, unfortunately, the recording doesn't include the chat.
Okay.
Would you just frame the questions out before you give your answer? That'd be really, really.
Sure. Sorry.
Thank you.
No problem. I mean, I think most of the questions there were around, can we simply describe it as a single supply, even though there's a few land-related things within that? The answer to that is very much probably. In reality, customs will see a sales invoice addressed to a foreign customer, and 9 times out of 10 might not take any contrary view to that. The 9th out of the 10th inspectors might then say, well, show me what actually happens here, tell me all about it, show me your engagement terms, and take it from there. And that's where things can go wrong. But I think it's always better to know what goes on, so that you're actually clear on what the implications could be. And if you are concerned that, I don't know, 50% of your supply is actually related to the land related part and it's not incidental, then you either change your T's and C's so that it's clearer that will be due on the land related part, or seek some ruling from HMRC that gives you some comfort that it's not going to be subject to VAT. But certainly any approach to HMRC is potentially fraught with danger. I'm long enough in the tooth to know that in principle it should be quite straightforward to get a ruling, but very often it's a challenge. And that we all know that the governments are struggling for revenue, so they will always come at it from the point of view of being taxable rather than not taxable.
2 questions have come through regarding EU to UK. Do you want to cover those later, or do you want to go for those now?
Let's go with those, yeah.
Okay, so the first one from Fanny Stokes, thank you indeed. What VAT should be charged on a home search and settling in package service delivered in the UK, invoiced from a European company to a European company in another European state?
Right, can you say that one again? Just
sure.
So
Yes. What VAT should be charged on a home search and settling in package service delivered in the UK, basically invoiced from a member of Europe in another European country?
So it's invoiced from, say, Germany to
the UK.
Dutch.
Yeah, and Tobias is asking the same question. If he's a relocation company in Germany, do we now have to expect to be charged VAT for all relocation services in the UK?
If there's a land related element, yes.
Still be the thing about the land related.
Yeah. If it's, so again, just to be clear, is that, so if I was a German entity supplying a UK entity or a Dutch entity?
That's a very good question, Gordon. What's your take on how that question's been phrased? So Fanny is saying specifically, what VAT should be charged on a home search and settling in package service delivered in the UK, invoiced by a European company in another European state? So that would be somebody in Germany invoicing the UK.
So yeah, let's say a company in Germany has a subcontractor in the UK.
Yeah, they're working.
They are then billing for that service from Germany to their client in the Netherlands. I think that would be
okay. Right. So the supply from the German to the Netherlands will be out with, or rather, will be supplied in the Netherlands, and subject to it not being land related, then it could be supplied in the Netherlands without German VAT. And we'll come on to the next stage. If it's not being taxed in Germany, where is it being taxed in the moment as well?
Fine. Do you want to go back to the slide?
Yeah, that's a good idea. We'll finish all the slides and then we can just have a question fest.
Yes, I think there's going to be one.
So yeah, again, just to summarise that package, certainly where we've seen, Gordon and I have discussed, if you can, incidental and ancillary is the way forward in terms of minimising the actual work that's involved. But if as a matter of substance and fact, the supplies are land related, then there's every chance that if asked, HMRC might have a point that actually most of what you're doing, or some of what you're doing, a large part of what you're doing is land related and could be taxed where the land is. Yeah, so can we move on to the final slide then? I'll just pick that off and then we'll pick up the questions properly. And the last slide is about the reverse charge. So we've talked about the place of supply being where the customer belongs. And what that typically does, certainly for a UK supplier supplying to somebody in the EU or elsewhere, is mean that no UK VAT is applicable. But like most things, some tax needs to be collected somewhere. And the effect of moving that place of supply to the customer is that the business customer has to require, or rather is required to declare local VAT on those imported services. And that's done by the reverse charge. And the reverse charge, I'll come on to the mechanics. Essentially, it's an easement whereby a supplier who's making a supply to another EU country or another country would normally be expected to charge VAT on that, but doesn't want the hassle of having to register in that country and so on. So the reverse charge simply moves the accounting for that sale, or the VAT on the sale, to the customer in their own country. And mechanically on the VAT returns, that means that the buyer, the customer, will show on their VAT return VAT at the local rate, as if they'd paid it to a local supplier in the output box in the VAT return. And that's based on the local value of the supply. So if it's in euros or whatever, they'll just do it at the rate applicable locally. And again, that was something we were talking about before we came on, around the VAT liabilities and VAT rates in EU countries and other countries, in fact. So that was part of the benefit of reverse charge, is that each overseas companies don't need to go into a country and learn the VAT law. It's all moved to the local customer, but they're able to then say, well, let's say hotel accommodation in France is 5% rather than 21% in Holland or whatever. So that's the mechanics for collecting the VAT as if it had been supplied in the country, and then on the same VAT return locally, the customer will recover that if they're able to, based on the normal local rules for VAT recovery. So the reverse charge is, generally speaking, neutral from a taxation point of view. You pay it as if you've just paid a local supplier through your VAT return, but immediately recover it if it's a business cost. And I suppose, just to be clear then, there is some VAT leakage there where the customer can't fully recover VAT. And that's particularly important for people like financial institutions, insurance companies, banks, things like that, who are not naturally able to recover VAT. So there can be a bit of a cost there on the reverse charge.
So, Alan, just to be clear then, and ignoring the land-related aspect, there are really three situations. I think we're saying, if it's a general service or a general home service, if it's a local client, then VAT is just charged in the normal way. If it's, and let's say, EU and UK, it's reverse charge. And if it's, let's say, an American client, a Chinese client, there's no VAT at all.
Correct, yeah.
And that category of reverse charge, I've just said EU and UK, but what about countries like, say, Switzerland, Norway? How do they fit? Do they fit into that same system?
They fit into a similar taxing system, but it's not the EU reverse charge. It's effectively a reverse charge out with the EU.
Yeah.
So a number of countries have a reverse charge beyond the EU, and certainly Norway and Switzerland are included in that.
Right. So most for Euro members, most European countries, reverse charge applies even outside EU.
Correct.
Of course,
Yeah.
that includes the UK now.
Indeed. Yeah.
There are two clarifications come through the Q&A box, so thank you very much, Fanny. First of all, there are two of these very complex issues. So Fanny asks, home search and settling in services delivered in the UK but invoiced through a Belgian company to a German company, which is kind of what you're talking about with the Netherlands.
Yeah. So I suppose it goes back to the question, who's your customer? If your customer is in Belgium or Germany, and it's a UK supplier, either of them will be outside the scope of UK VAT and supplying where the customer belongs. You just need to understand which is your customer. Is it the Belgian sub-agent or the German end customer? It doesn't really matter in VAT terms in that respect, but fundamentally you should always understand who your customer is.
But reverse charge will apply, that.
To whoever pays for it, yeah.
I know that a number of questions were coming in initially around this. Following Brexit, we're now receiving invoices which are charging VAT. In the past, they didn't, and that was simply incorrect because there's no change.
There's no change, yeah.
So, yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say, if that line of supply is UK to Belgium to Germany, the onward supply from Belgium to Germany would follow the same rule, the general rule, business to business, and have no charge, and it would end up that the Germans would do their own reverse charge and incur and declare German VAT in the end, without either the UK or Belgian party having to register in another country.
Yeah,
which is the main driver for the rule.
Brilliant. Which leads me on to Fanny's final point, which I think you just covered, but because this is not my area of expertise, I'm not sure what I'm going to say anyway. And what if the same service would be delivered in the UK, invoiced through a Belgian company to a Belgian company?
So from Belgium to Belgium locally?
Yes, yeah.
So I would expect that to be subject to Belgian VAT as a domestic supply.
Sure, okay. I'm glad this is not my
area. And I suppose, again, just for clarity, the exception would be if there was any land-related part that needed to be taxed in the UK.
Fine.
But if we can, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, if we assume that there wasn't, then yeah, it's a domestic supply plus Belgian VAT.
So here is another twist on that. Thank you, Susan Myers. In understanding who is your customer, is it the employee on the ground receiving the service or the company we contract with and invoice?
The company that you're invoicing. Absolutely. That's an easy one.
There we go. Excellent.
I'm just seeing one from Simon Scott, and that's about what land-related means, and querying whether, because a lease does not affect the physical property, then that's not land-related. I think, Simon, that is incorrect. I think I've certainly seen specific examples in the HMRC guidance that review of a tenancy agreement is definitely land-related. Is that right, Alan?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the earlier slides, and you'll see them again, is pretty much cut from HMRC's guidance, and I think that they're clear on that application. So,
and I think one of the leading cases, not that I know many VAT cases, but it related to an insurance survey being done of a quarry, and they said in that case that was still land related because it related to a piece of land. So there's nothing physically being done. It was just a case of a valuation being carried out of it. And again, that was definitely land related. So yeah, the idea that has to be sort of physical engagement with the property, I don't think is really a factor in this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So given the portioning out of the invoices and what's property related, going back to Tobias's question, because he's just put a clarification in the Q&A. His question is, as a German company, do we now have to expect to be charged VAT for all relocation services out of the UK, or does the UK not put VAT on their invoice to the German company?
I think in very simple terms, it still boils down to what's being supplied. So if you weren't before, there shouldn't be a change. But fundamentally, you should understand what you're being supplied. And if that includes land related, then maybe there should have always been that on it as a point. But there should be no change per se, but clarity on the nature of the supply might unsettle that, shall we say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that we delved into this originally because of that fundamental question about should there now be VAT between UK and EU, and we're saying no. But in the course of answering that question, we kind of almost stumbled across a different issue, which was the land-related aspect. And I see there's a scary question that Simon's added here about retrospective assessment for VAT. I mean, in practice, would HMRC or a foreign tax authority ever say you've been doing it wrong, therefore we're going back several years on an issue like this?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the UK, the statute of limitation effectively is 4 years. So if customs examined a sales record for that period and found that there were supplies that they regarded as land related in the UK, they could quite easily assess for that additional tax, which would then require you to either on-charge it or subsume it within that business, unfortunately. And potentially raise penalties as well, penalties and interest. So that's why it's important to understand what your supplies are and whether there is a risk that it can be seen that there are substantive land-related supplies being made.
Does that perhaps suggest then, Alan, and going back to an earlier question about should EURA, the ARP in the UK, be seeking a ruling? I can see how the downside of that is it may be a ruling in the wrong direction, but at least there would then be complete clarity across the industry. And it's quite clear from the questions that there is a mix of practices just now for completely genuine reasons, and possibly even to the extent of different advisors giving different advice. Having heard all this, I just wonder what your instinct is. Is it worthwhile trying to get a ruling on this?
I suspect my instinct is not, simply because I'm not comfortable or confident that HMRC would A, understand the question, and then B, not go straight to the answer that gives them the most tax. My experience is that HMRC will always go for an option that ends up generating the most tax, and that's wrong. I accept that that's not necessarily the right place to start or end, but that's practically what happens. HMRC do publish trade agreements, so there are a number of trade agreements where they've set out the standard for sectors. There are things like the motor trade have agreements around demonstrator cars and so on. So there's precedent, and it was the SMTA, the Motor Trade Association, that agreed them. So if there were a body that could go to HMRC and ask, it's not impossible to get an answer. And they may also, if they didn't publish a trade agreement, they may update their guidance to say that we've agreed with a trade arrangement agreement that this is how it's going to work. So it's not impossible. It's probably desirable, actually, as you say, that so everybody understands how it works. I'm just a little skeptical, I'm afraid, that it wouldn't necessarily answer the question fairly, and B, would end up going the wrong way anyway in terms of creating more taxed supplies, if I put it like that, where the other party might not be able to quickly recover it immediately.
Yeah.
That's one of the things we were talking about with Dominic earlier in terms of, if it happens that there is land-related supplies and UK VAT or local VAT applies to that land-related stuff, how does the customer get the VAT back? Foreign VAT. And the short answer is there's two ways. One, you can try and register for VAT locally. So that means convincing a local taxing authority that you're in the country for some reason, for business, that you've incurred these costs and you'd like the VAT back. Which I think, again, in my experience in Europe, people kind of accept that that's what people do. We move around and we have different activities in different countries. So that's not impossible. The other option is, particularly for non-Europeans, where the US and Far East and so on, where they're incurring some local costs, that there's a mechanism to make a reclaim directly from that taxing authority, just separately, because you're in business and you've incurred some local costs. The challenge with that is that each country will then have its own rules and regulations in terms of how they process it. Historically, again, when the UK was in the EU, the UK was in the EU, there was an online system that we could access, and each country's rules were embedded in it, so you couldn't effectively do the claims wrong. And probably the biggest benefit of that was also the language, so that claims could be made in English, whereas now essentially non-EU entities will apply in the local language. So if it's in Italy or Portuguese or whatever, you have to complete the forms in their local language, which becomes a bit more of a challenge. But it's possible. It typically boils down to how much is involved and the resource required to then submit the claim.
So quick question, clarification from Ronnie. Do I understand correctly that if a UK company invoices a European Belgian company, the Belgian European company still needs to do the reverse charge procedure?
Yes.
Yes, there we go. And I told you to have me bring this up before we started the call. This chestnut, it depends on which country. Some return all VAT and some take their time to the point that the reclaim goes beyond the statutory limit. Mentioning no countries in particular, ATAD, but I know that's a deep wound for you.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, and it's a while ago now, I'm sure I'll have to name the name because it was a matter of fact and public record, but Italy were taken to court because they took so long to process 13th directive claims. So whilst we know it goes on, there has been some efforts by the EU to tidy that up, part of which was that online system, and it was good. It's a matter of regret that we don't have that anymore in the UK, because it was a pragmatic modern solution, and it got repayments made. Practically as a firm, we've had money back from it because we've sent people to conferences in Germany and whatever. We send the Germans a VAT receipt and we've been repaid, so it works.
It does. It depends from country to country, and TAD.
It absolutely depends.
Euro has lost thousands, in fact tens of thousands, and sometimes the VAT authority introduced, like I was saying before the call, introduced weird rules like you could only have 50% back. Marianne, tagging on to Ronnie's question, does the UK company need to indicate that the reverse charge applies on its invoice?
It used to be the case that it was mandatory while we were in the EU. All you need to do now is suggest that it's outside the scope of UK VAT. If I was you, I would put that on it as well, because it helps everybody understand that you're expecting the customer to do reverse charge accounting. But I think that the regulation has been removed because we're outside the EU now. So for across EU supplies, that will be required, but a supply out of the UK to someone else, it doesn't really matter. Just outside the scope would be the VAT description.
We are at the hour, and I think this is so fascinating for me and for you too as well. I mean, I have a legal background. Gordon, you are a lawyer. Alan, you're dealing with this daily. For people who like to surround the world in certainty, this must be a very, very frustrating topic for you both. and for everybody listening. All the comments that have come through from the people in the UK, you know, not to have clarity is frustrating. Just to let you know, I will put a link to the PowerPoint, a PDF of the PowerPoint. I'll embed it on our website, and I will send you the link when I send out the recording. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending today. Thank you so much, Alan, for really quite, you know, and Gordon too, for trying to bring clarity to what is very, very complex, and also to have, you know, to have that reassurance that actually, you know, it's going to depend on so many things. It's a bit like, are you a global quality seal? It very much depends on the interpretation of the auditor. So as you said, you know, that's, you know, shrouded in uncertainty. Alan, Gordon, thank you so much for today. It's been fascinating. And everybody listening, I will send you out the recording with the link to the PDF of Alan's PowerPoint either tomorrow or Monday. In the meantime, everybody, thank you so much for all your questions, all your comments, and we'll catch up again soon. Thanks so much, Gordon and Alan.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Bye.